Alright, first and foremost, was this movie better than Star Trek Generations?
Yes, in every possible way, I think. Other than maybe Malcolm McDowell was really good. I think he was better in that movie than anybody in this movie. And I thought Patrick Stewart was better in the previous movie.
This movie was way darker in tone than really any Next Generation stuff that had come before, outside of maybe Conspiracy.
Yeah, the best of both worlds.
There were a lot of horror and suspense shots in this one, which I was fine with.
Yeah, I thought definitely the strongest element of this movie was the way it was shot. Not necessarily the cinematography, but in terms of like overall visual storytelling approach, I guess. I don't know.
I suspect that Jonathan Frakes discovered Dutch angles right before directing this movie because they were everywhere. Yeah, the cinematography and the score, because we talked about Jerry Goldsmith, both made this feel like a movie and not an extension episode of the show. And again, pushing away from the original series only worked to this movie's benefit. It was kind of an insult to assume that this cast couldn't be in a Star Trek movie on their own, and they needed to be buoyed by the original series in some way.
I agree. On the topic of the music, I ended up being disappointed after that early stuff over the credits. I thought some of the music toward the end in particular, when the Vulcans come down, was way too much, way over the top. It made it feel a little too like a product, like they're just saying, let's plug these parts in and this is how you get to this point.
I don't know if I would agree with that.
Still better than the previous movie, at least.
I liked how we got right into the meat of this movie within the first 10 minutes, because I did not want a bunch of backslapping and high-fiving while I was waiting for the story to actually start.
I agree in theory, but I thought the biggest shortcoming of the story here, other than things just not making sense, was the lack of character focus. Picard obviously has his background with the Borg, and they bring it up, but it doesn't really come to the forefront until toward the end. And other than that, there's not really any character exploration. I thought if they had focused more on that and less on the action, the entire movie would have been way better.
Yeah, his character focus in terms of the Borg stuff felt very rushed. That scene where he was with Lily and he decided to blow up the ship within the span of 30 seconds, it would have worked better if Lily had left in a huff and other things happened, like maybe Beverly or Worf was about to get assimilated before Picard realized his actions were hurting everybody else, and then changed his mind.
In the context of this movie, I do think that would have been better. But the fact that Picard's entire arc and overall behavior felt so out of character in the first place, I think is a bigger issue for me. In this movie, Picard is very ruthless for no reason. He's very vengeful for no reason.
And they use the excuse of his Borg experiences, which, if I had not seen any other Star Trek Next Generation stuff, I would buy it, but I have. I've seen the show. I've seen how Picard has dealt with these experiences already, and this movie went against that.
And introducing the element of him being able to hear the Borg was something that I thought was going to become important, and it seems like they kind of wanted it to be toward the end when he hears Data. But that's the only point where it made any kind of difference to what was happening, and it was never explained. If he had that previous experience with the Borg, and they left something in him that is giving him that connection, I would think they would somehow be aware of it after doing they had to have done so many tests on him after that experience, and they converted him back into a normal person somehow, after he had all these inorganic parts, stuck to his head and everything. It raised a lot of questions without actually providing any additional substance to the movie, or any additional story elements. I could see some people saying that it has something to do with the Queen, that she purposely wanted Picard to hear these things so that he can be drawn to them or something like that. But that just brings up what you said earlier of Picard just being a normal guy. Why are they so focused on him? And obviously it's because he's the main character, but in universe it doesn't make a lot of sense.
I do think it was a good move to use an established antagonist for this movie, even if they didn't handle how they used them well.
I agree and disagree.
Oh, good.
Because it does give you that kind of added element of Picard's connection, but again, the follow-up doesn't feel consistent with what we saw in the show. I think maybe if they had started fresh, some of the questions that we have wouldn't be there.
Yeah, but I think about Star Trek Generations, and the questions we had there were because we had no established context.
But then that makes me think of the actual show and the way the writing in an individual episode would give you enough to establish a threat and deal with it. And even just looking back at Best of Both Worlds, that was a 2-part that put together is still less than this entire movie, but was so much better.
And it was written by the same guy, right?
I think so. Well, it was 2 writers on this movie. And from the perspective of bringing back an established threat, part of what I was wondering watching the movie is whatever happened with Hugh. The movie, again, would have been way more interesting if they had actually explored the ideas that had been introduced in regards to the Borg, instead of just treating them as kind of a fill-in threat and then focusing on the action.
And if they had brought in Hugh, that would have solved the problem of Geordi not really having anything to do in this movie either, other than tell Cochran how awesome he is, and watch him pee.
And if they had explored the concept of the Borg Queen in this movie the way they handled Hugh in his first episode, again, the movie would have been way better. They've established that they can do that they can introduce new concepts and properly explore them in one episode of a show, and here they have an entire movie to work with, but they're handling it in a far shallower way.
But a more expensive way.
Which unfortunately is probably what matters to most audiences. And speaking of female Borg with the Queen, why do we always only see males that have been assimilated? And I know people are going to bring up things from other Star Trek stuff because I know there are female Borg that pop up later. But up to this point, I can't think of another female Borg that we've seen, although I could be wrong.
So there was no talk of prepping for the Borg over the past years, despite knowing and having faced them before? What was everybody doing for all of that time? And if Picard personally knows how to damage the Borg, including what random spot on their planet-sized cube to shoot at, why has he not been making constant reports on how to combat the Borg? It seems like something that he would want to do, or something that Starfleet would want to pull out of him.
And I can't believe I'm making this argument, but maybe after his experiences with Hugh, well, but see, this isn't consistent with this movie, but in universe, maybe he feels more empathy with the Borg, not something that he wants to completely exterminate, so he kept that information to himself.
Well, when they show up in this movie, the first thing he wants to do is kill all of them.
Yeah, that's true. And then he tells them to shoot the spot, so yeah, I guess, I don't know.
It was also kind of odd how everyone now takes time travel at face value. I mean, when the Borg were going back in time, Geordi was like, oh, they're opening up a time warp. And everyone was like, oh, cool. If it's so common and easy, why don't they do it all the time and fix shit? They could even go back in time and stop the Borg cube before it got to Earth, or at the very least stop it from killing half of Starfleet.
And if the Borg have demonstrated this ability to be able to go back in time, what's to stop them from doing the same thing somewhere else? And why would they do it in such a way that it drew the attention of everyone else? They basically made it as hard for themselves as possible to achieve their goals.
Yeah, including going back, 12 hours before humanity's greatest accomplishment. And let's say that when they went back, Cochran did die in the initial Borg attack. Could the Enterprise crew have launched the ship anyway and gotten the Vulcans' attention? Then the Vulcans would come down and say, well, you guys space traveled from the future, so I guess the result is the same. It's actually better since you saved us a lot of catching up.
That brings up the question of changing the timeline, because Picard tells everyone that they have to avoid anything that would change things, but just by being there, no matter what, they're going to be changing things. Unless this is how it happened the first time in the first place, in which case it wouldn't matter.
And they don't even seem to take many precautions. Like they say, let's put on these dirty old clothes, but not give Data a face mask.
And I know there are going to be people saying that, well, there's no way to make time travel make sense, so you have to accept some illogical things. But if time travel is real, if it is possible to travel through time, which it may be, then it has to work a certain way. And regardless, if you're writing a story that involves a concept, the way you use that concept has to internally make sense. And that is not the way these writers are approaching that concept, or the Borg, or Picard. All these inconsistencies, it all comes from the same type of approach to writing, which is one of not really caring enough about making it all make sense.
Doing a bunch of hand waving and saying, well, it's time travel, so it's never going to make sense, so I don't even have to try.
Yeah, which is bullshit. I wondered, when the Borg are assimilating the ship or whatever, all those tubes and mechanical things that they're sticking on everything, what does that stuff do? What is the purpose of it?
Well, my question is, where does that stuff come from?
Well, that too. I mean, they could have had the replicators replicate it, but at the end, when Picard and crew have taken over the ship again, that stuff is still there. Did they do a baryon sweep? How did they take care of that? And how do they know that the Borg haven't installed like a virus or some kind of other thing connecting with all that that's going to cause problems later?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't even know the Borg were on the ship in the first place when they went back through time.
Yeah, there's probably a bunch of Borgs still in there.
How do they know a Borg didn't hop into one of those escape pods? I thought it was really strange that throughout this entire movie, no one on the ship really tried to contact the people on the surface, but it would have been really prudent to do so since the ship was being assimilated. And no one on the surface really tried to contact anyone on the ship, even though they acknowledged they lost contact for unknown reasons, and that usually elicits an immediate emergency response. But everyone just kind of shrugged on both sides. Like even when Riker and Geordi went up with Cochran and they're like, there's the Enterprise, they're probably just coming to see us off. It's like they've been trying not to die for this entire movie, and you have no idea.
That's a good point. I assumed that they were somehow sending communications that we just didn't see in between scenes, but the way they acted at the end, I think you're right. I had questions about the Borg Queen, especially if we know that apparently she's been there the whole time. So when they blew up the Borg cube in Best of Both Worlds Part 2, they made it sound like the Borg Queen was there on that cube because Picard remembered her. So is this the same Queen? What is the purpose of the Queen in the world of the Borg? They kind of addressed that a little bit in the movie, but not in a way that really made sense. They just said she brings order to chaos or something. But it doesn't seem to fit in with what we've seen of the Borg and how they operate. And again, thinking back to Hugh was a new element that felt like a fully realized element. The Borg Queen feels like they said, we need something new. Let's just come up with the Borg Queen. And to me, it brought up similarities to Aliens and the Alien Queen with the way the Borg are taking over the ship and turning it into, their Borgy environment, the same way the aliens create their kind of colony on LV-426. But Aliens is a way better movie, so when you're making me think of a way better movie when I'm watching this one, it doesn't help.
I did think it was a good move to separate the main cast into groups and try to give them all things to do that kept them occupied. It still isn't perfect for everybody. Geordi and Beverly got shafted again, and Beverly didn't really have to in this movie because she had so much Borg medical knowledge, she could have done some stuff to help either fight or assist.
What they should have done is have her trying to de-assimilate some of the crew members or something like that instead of having Picard just blast them.
Right, or that could have been used when Lily confronted Picard, and he said there's nothing we can do, and then Beverly would prove that there was something they could do.
But I agree that they handled the entire crew way better than the previous movie did. And especially Data, who was really annoying in the previous movie and was not bad in here.
I was surprised that he was out of the picture for so long, and I had kind of forgotten too until he randomly telepathically contacted Picard. I also thought it was funny that nobody else apparently thought about Data either. Picard was about to leave and let the ship explode when Data was like, hey, what about me? And Picard was like, fuck.
Yeah, what bothered me about that was that's supposed to be the point where Picard suddenly starts thinking about his crew members and, I need to actually help them. But then he goes after the one that's not alive. He goes after Data. But there are all these other people that have been assimilated. He still hasn't changed his mind about them, despite Lily chastising him for just killing them. He still doesn't try to save them. They all get melted at the end.
And I said it earlier, but I'm very thankful that somebody told both the writers and Brent Spiner to rope it in. And you and I both complained about Data rehashing all the same character growth points over and over again, but acting like they're new. And for the last movie, that was the whole thing. In this movie, there was actually something new for him to experience, which was a plus.
I would say two things if you count him being able to turn his emotion chip on and off.
But it was too bad that nobody ever explained how or why Geordi decided to lose his visor. It seemed like a crutch because the writers said, we don't really have anything for this guy to do in this movie either, but we have to make him seem different somehow. So how about we just have him walking around with eyes?
And it's inconsistent with the show where he had the opportunity to get his eyes fixed and didn't.
And he tells people why he doesn't want to. Geordi could have had something to do in this movie by being in contact with Data as he was getting all of these new experiences. I read that Marina Sirtis said she had the most fun making Star Trek Generations, but I find that hard to believe because she didn't do anything in that movie, unless she meant it in the sense of I didn't have to do or say anything and I still got paid.
Well, she got to crash the ship. How many actors can say that? That is interesting, though, yeah.
What did you think about Alfre Woodard as Lily?
I thought her performance was good, but her character didn't matter at all. They seem to be trying to build a relationship, even if just one out of respect, between her and Picard, but it was very underdeveloped, and it only popped up when they needed to get to the next plot point, which was like once or twice.
Yeah, I get her being there as the outsider for the audience to relate to if they're not familiar with what's happening. But yeah, it seems like they're trying to pull her in too many different directions. Like the fact that you thought her and Picard were going to make out at the end.
And I thought about the way you're saying that she could have been like the audience character, but she comes in a little too late, where the story's already in motion and all the elements are already there, other than the Borg Queen, which she doesn't even interact with.
Yeah, why didn't she ever have a conversation with the Queen or the Borg? Because then she could bring her past perspective to the conversation.
What did you think of Zephram Cochran?
I thought the parts on the planet, the fact that those scenes were so short before it cut back up to the ship, it seemed like the writers knew they didn't have as much substance for that content. I thought the character himself was fine, but his thoughts and his emotions and how he felt about everything was very well established very early.
I agree. The way the crew was constantly simping over him was really annoying, and especially since it was the same scene over and over again. And I think from the writer's perspective, they meant that to be comic relief, but a lot of it wasn't funny. I can see how they intended it to be, but it was just kind of there. And I thought his arc didn't feel like it actually happened. I get what they were going for. I understand how we were supposed to interpret it, but it didn't feel like it actually happened in the movie. He goes from not caring about his role in the future to suddenly being in awe of seeing the Earth from space, even though he's already encountered these people from the future and everything, and been blasted at by an alien ship. Part of the problem is they went so hard in the direction at first, and for like 3/4 of the movie, of him not wanting to be that person, and literally trying to run away. Which also made me question, when they have him flying the ship at the end, if they already know that he doesn't want to do that, I wouldn't be trusting him, not with the attitude that he had up to that point. And I thought it was weird, given that we're dealing with the Borg, and given the previous movie, that there was no Guinan in this movie. And apparently they didn't even ask Whoopi Goldberg, so her character was never part of the discussion, which is very strange. And they could have used her in place of Picard hearing the Borg voices or whatever, and in place of Lily to be the person that Picard talks to and that kind of guides the plot when they need that to happen. And I wondered at the end, when Data was pretending to be working for the Borg Queen, why did he keep up his pretense for so long when he pretended to shoot at the other ship and all that?
He could have blasted that coolant tank a long time before.
Yeah, what's the point of waiting for the moment that he did it?
Because Picard has to look really cool climbing up a ladder.
Climbing up those vacuum hoses. And even though I've complained about some of the attempts at humor not working, the moments that did work, which were mostly for me not down on Earth, but were actually up with like Worf and stuff like that, some of that was legitimately funny, and was definitely way better than the attempts at humor with Data in the previous movie.
But overall, this movie was way better than the last one. This is the only Next Generation movie I can remember watching more than once and can actually recall the plot. I know I've seen the ones after this, but I can't tell you much. I think the guy's face gets stretched down in one of them, and it looks really bad.
Ooh, okay. So we have something to look forward to at least.
And Tom Hardy's in one of them. So we'll eventually get to those. If you had to give this one a grade, what would you say?
I'm wavering between a B- and a C+. It's definitely way better than the previous one, but in terms of the story and the writing, I definitely don't think it's a good movie. I think what makes it work is the actual production of it, the way the movie is directed. You know, Jonathan Frakes did a good job. The action is well shot. Some of the effects are actually pretty cool. But would I call it a good movie? I think it's a watchable movie. I don't personally see myself watching it again. I would much rather go back and watch Best of Both Worlds, but I didn't think it was terrible.
This is widely considered the best of the Next Generation movies.
That is just what I wanted to hear. Given all the problems with the story and just so many things not making sense, I think I'm going to go down to a C+.
I'm going to say a solid B. I agree with most of the points you made, but my standards are lower than yours. So thanks for watching.
Let us know in the comments why we're wrong.